Good evening and welcome. The Chinese army came into areas along the line of actual control quite unexplained. They've pulled back once again without giving any reason. The question is, what's at play here? What pushed the ingress? What's made the PLA pull back? Is it setting the stage for a thaw in India-China ties? Suspense still looms over whether there will be a bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping at the BRICS summit in Kazan. What does this mean for the two most important countries in the global south? And all that and more is my top focus on the NewsTrack.
LSA truce done. Bilateral next. Big suspense on Modi-Xi meet. India-China handshake at BRICS. Can Modi-Xi bury ghost of Galwan? Borders, breakthroughs, BRICS. That is our top focus on NewsTrack.
Before we go across live to Kazan, where the big BRICS summit is taking place, India's Prime Minister and the Iranian President in a bilateral meeting at this moment, given the focus that Iran has been in the Middle East over the past few weeks. That meeting assumes significance. We'll get you ground report. Suspense hangs over whether there will be a bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping at the Kazan BRICS summit in Russia. Yesterday, when India announced, and this morning China confirmed that there will be a pullback along the line of actual control, there was a lot of talk about the possibility of there being a bilateral today. Tomorrow is the summit, and then Prime Minister Modi leaves in the evening tomorrow. So now that that bilateral hasn't happened, there are questions about whether there will be a bilateral at all. Now the decks have been cleared for the bilateral. For the latest on this, I'm joined now live from Kazan by our Strategic Affairs Editor Gaurav Sawant. Gaurav, do we know when and whether a bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping will be taking place?
Rahul, we are told it's likely to take place in the next 24 hours and it could be earlier. Right now, it's a bilateral with Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian. There's already been one with Russian President Vladimir Putin, as we are well aware. The third bilateral remains, which everyone's, talking about and considers extremely crucial, is one between Chinese President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. From what sources tell India today, it's just an issue of scheduling. It's most likely taking place tomorrow morning or tomorrow afternoon in middle of the BRICS summit. Or they're both trying to find one window where the two will interact. It will be more than just a handshake, is what sources tell India today, and that higher direction to take this relationship forward. Because so far the agreement, Rahul, is only on disengagement of troops. Does it also mean de-escalation? Does it also mean de-induction? Because that is something that India is very keen on, to ensure that there is no one accidental discharge of weapon, two weapons that can cause massive destruction, whether it's the artillery or the armor or the mechanized forces. They move back initially in terms of de-escalation and then move back to their peacetime locations in terms of de-induction. Once that happens, the relationship is on an even keel, and that can only happen when that higher direction of war comes or peace comes from the Prime Minister of India and the President of China. What is India insisting on? It's insisting on equal and mutual security, and equal and mutual security very clearly means China can mobilize much faster. China can bring in better forces and stronger forces more quickly to the line of actual control compared to India. India's infrastructure development is still taking some time. A lot of it has still happened. So equal and mutual security, Rahul, would mean that China moves its forces back much further. India moves its forces back some distance, because that trust factor has been shattered by Chinese actions in the summer of 2020. While China may seek to blame India, but there have been two instances, one in Doklam in 2017 and the second in Galwan and all across eastern Ladakh in 2020. So 2017 and 2020 have been two instances where all the agreements that India and China painstakingly arrived at between 1993 to 1996 to 2014 was unfortunately thrown out of the window. The Mahabalipuram, Wuhan declaration, all of them China completely ignored when its forces came charging forward to be stalled by the Indian forces virtually at the gates, on the north and south bank of Pengong Tso. But one crucial aspect, Rahul, has been India's QPQ or quid pro quo operations that had taken place on the Kailash Hills on north and south bank of Pengong Tso, which showed China two things. One, India has strength, and two, India is willing to use that strength to defend our borders. And the past 4 years, the mirror deployment has also indicated that. Will this strength lead to peace? Shakti se Shanti? That remains to be seen in the next 24 hours.
We have to
and then the
spend some time analyzing what's going on in the Dragon's Head, because they came in unannounced, caught the Indian Army initially off guard, then the Indian Army built up deployments, stood man-to-man, shoulder-to-shoulder across the line of actual control. Now they're pulling back. What's really going on here? What's at play? Why did they come in? Why are they going back? What's the larger picture, larger messaging? We need to decode that. But I just want to spend some time on the other important bilateral that happened today, the Modi-Putin dosti, which was on full display as the two leaders met on the sidelines of the BRICS summit. In their third meeting in the last 3 months, Prime Minister Modi and Russian President Vladimir Putin greeted each other with a hug. PM Modi also reiterated his message of peace to Vladimir Putin amidst Russia's ongoing war with Ukraine, batting for dialogue and diplomacy as the only solution to resolving conflict.
एक्सेलेंसी, रूस और यूक्रेन के बीच चल रहे संघर्ष के विषय पर हम लगातार संपर्क में रहे हैं। जैसा मैंने पहले भी कहा है, हमारा मानना है कि समस्याओं का समाधान शांतिपूर्ण तरीके से ही होना चाहिए। शांति और स्थिरता की जल्द से जल्द बहाली का हम पूरी तरह समर्थन करते हैं। हमारे सभी प्रयास मानवता को प्रमुखता देते हैं। आने वाले समय में भी भारत हर संभव सहयोग देने के लिए तैयार है।
Принять целый ряд важных решений, направленных на дальнейшее совершенствование деятельности объединения и укрепление многопланового сотрудничества в его рамках. У нас такие отношения, что я считал, что вы и так все понимаете.
हमारे इतने रिश्ते हैं कि मुझे ऐसा लगा कि आपको कोई अनुवाद नहीं चाहिए.
So the Modi-Putin bonhomie on display there. Big suspense though at the moment is about whether there will be indeed an India-China bilateral in Russia. Hours before Prime Minister Modi's departure, India announced a big breakthrough in Ladakh. Today, China officially confirmed the agreement with India to resolve the border standoff. The thaw is significant both strategically and diplomatically. Here's how.
A border breakthrough by India and China, a path that leads to the end of the big Ladakh standoff. A day after India made the surprise declaration that a resolution towards peace had been achieved, China has also confirmed a pact with India to end the standoff between the two armies in eastern Ladakh.
Over a recent period of time, China and India have been in close communication through diplomatic and military channels on issues related to China-India border. Now the two sides have reached resolutions on relevant matters, which China speaks highly of. Going forward, China will continue to work with India to implement these resolutions.
The details remain broad. No deals are ever straightforward with China, and the road to the agreement hasn't been an easy one. It was a result of weeks of intense diplomatic and military negotiations. Caution is probably a good idea before celebrating any real breakthrough, but according to government sources, several meetings involving both the Ministry of External Affairs and the Indian Army did take place. with discussions focused on ensuring smooth patrolling in areas where disengagement has already occurred in eastern Ladakh. But the Depsang and Demchok areas presented unique challenges due to their strategic importance and heightened tensions. Rebuilding trust will be key.
The Chinese side is wanting to restore the relationship between India and China to what it was earlier. It wants the other aspects of the relationship like trade, commerce, investment to move ahead. It will, of course, take some time to restore the trust between the two countries, but at least I think a beginning can be made.
India and China have come to an agreement about normal patrolling and that there will be disengagement. And the Foreign Secretary says that, we are now looking at the resolution of the problem which arose in 2020. This is welcome, but let me put it this way, trust but verify.
The timing of the thaw is also crucial. India improving ties with China comes just when it is being hounded by Western powers over alleged operations to kill pro-Khalistani terrorists in those countries. Many experts believe a defreeze in India-China ties could pose a new challenge to the United States. In fact, that could very much be why the two countries have found an opportunity to at least try setting aside their differences. The possibility of India and China going further in resolving their various other disputes will worry the United States, that thinks India has an important role to play in policing the Indo-Pacific to contain Chinese influence. Closer ties between Russia, China and India could also establish the global South as a counterweight to Western hegemony in a world at war. Bureau Report, India Today.
India and China have agreed to disengage in eastern Ladakh, but militarily, what happens next? What are the specific changes in the standoff frontier in eastern Ladakh, where the two armies are still amassed each other? How will the next steps, disengagement, de-escalation, de-induction, how are the next steps likely to proceed? Take a look at this report.
After over 4 years in a frozen war-like situation, 17 meetings at the diplomatic level and 21 border meets between the two armies, a surprise declaration from the two sides locked in the world's biggest military standoff. India and China unveil a big step forward. A day after India announced a jointly achieved resolution to resume army patrolling by both sides on the tense frontier, China confirmed the pact. As a first step, the two armies will disengage from long-standing friction points in the Depsang Bulge in northern Ladakh, where China has wrested an advantage for years, and the Charding Ningling Nala in southeastern Ladakh's Demchok sector, where the Indian army dominates. As a second step, the most significant result of the resolution will be a resumption of patrolling by the Indian army in the Depsang and Demchok areas. The third step will involve the other three friction points, which emerged in May 2020. That is, the Galwan Valley, Gogra Hot Springs and the banks of the Pangong Lake. The buffer zones created following the June 2020 clash in Galwan will slowly give way to a resumption in routine patrolling by both armies under strictly agreed protocols. With disengagement completed and frontline troops pulled back, and patrolling resuming along the LAC, the two militaries will then de-escalate, which involves soothing temperatures by pulling back war-ready weaponry and equipment from the border areas, including tanks, vehicles, missiles, artillery, radars and more. The last phase will be de-induction, where both armies will shift out the divisions they've massed at the Ladakh border in order to check each other, leaving a pre-2020 routine military presence.
As far as we are concerned, we were looking at that we want to go back to the status quo of April 2020. Point number one. Thereafter, we will be looking at disengagement, de-escalation, normal management of line of actual control. And this normal management of line actual control will not just stop there. There are phases in that also. So this what I am saying, it has been our stance from April 20 itself when General Y.K. Joshi was the army commander, and even today that remains the same way. So as of now, what has happened? We are trying to restore the trust. How the trust will get restored? It will get restored once we are able to see each other. And we are able to convince each other, look, the buffer zones which are there, which have been created, we are not creeping. And both have to reassure each other. Petroleum gives you that kind of advantage.
The resolution achieved by the two countries won't reflect overnight, nor should it be expected that things will run as smoothly as described. After all, with China, nothing is ever what it seems. Chinese intentions, an enormous trust deficit, and mutual lessons learned from the ongoing standoff mean things will be slow and deliberate. But with both sides at least reaching a resolution, this is the first big sign of an overall thaw. For the Indian military, the guard will never be down. Bureau Report, India Today.
The Chinese army came into areas which India used to patrol along the line of actual control without any warning or justification in the summer of 2020. We've been trying to push back for the last 4.5 years. Now suddenly the Chinese have agreed to turn back and also take some of their troops back. The specifics will get spelled out in the time to come, and of course India will verify, but that's at least what the Chinese Foreign Office seems to have confirmed, along with what the Indian side put out in the public domain. So what's really at play? Why did they come in? They never fully explained that. Why are they pulling out? There's no proper justification for it. Of course, India is delighted that they're pulling out, but then why? So what's at play? What's the larger, bigger picture? And will this Modi-Xi bilateral happen? I'm joined at this moment by Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma, Distinguished Fellow at the Viveka International Foundation. We have Kamal Sibbal, one of India's best-known foreign secretaries, joining us on this broadcast. Nitin Gokhale joins us. He's joining us from Kazan, so he has his ear on the ground, give us a sense of what's happening. We have Raymond Vikri. He's at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS. I have N.R. Tenjen joining us from the Tahi Institute in China. I want to go across to Nitin Gokhale first. Nitin, will this bilateral happen? When will it happen? It could have happened this evening. It hasn't happened. Why is it being pushed to tomorrow? Is there still uncertainty? Or is it just a formality that it will take place tomorrow?
I think it's just a formality. As you heard Gaurav saying it, I'm hearing the same input that there are scheduling issues because the BRICS is supposed to be the main focus here. All other countries are here, and I am sure the BRICS organizers, especially host Russia, doesn't want the China-India meeting or India-China meeting to overshadow BRICS, but it will inevitably do so when it takes place. But if it's a scheduling issue, then there's going to be a short meeting because if it hasn't happened so far, then I don't see that happening tonight. Now it will have to be tomorrow, and tomorrow is a packed day for BRICS agenda. So it could be just a short meeting with both the leaders putting a stamp of approval to the first step of disengagement that has been announced by India and then confirmed by China. So that's where it is.
So what's your best sense of why the Chinese have agreed to pull back at this time? There's talk that this could happen at the time of the G20 summit in Delhi. It didn't happen. There have been other opportunities when Modi and Xi could have met. It didn't happen. At this moment, why now? And to what extent will they actually pull back?
I can only speculate, Rahul, because we still don't know why they came in 2020. There have been several theories on that. I have my own theory. Other people have their own theory. But what I can sense or what I can see right now is the geopolitical churn, the Chinese themselves facing internal issues, challenges. I won't say problems, but challenges. And then constant hammering by the Quad countries against China. All that may have put together. But one big reason one must understand also is the physical stalling of the Chinese advances that India did immediately after being caught off guard in the initial stage of the standoff since May 2020 would also make China rethink their strategy because it did not achieve what they wanted fully. They may have tried to push us back, push India back, but it didn't happen. And India is the only country, remember, which has stood firmly physically against Chinese aggression, despite all the big talk which happens in South China Sea, which happens in East China Sea. Neither Japan nor United States has been able to help either Vietnam or Philippines, but India is the only country. So there could have been a rethink. There could be also geopolitical considerations, but that's all I can think of right now. This is just half a step, like I said yesterday. Too early to be euphoric, too early to be elated. Let's wait and watch and wait for the details to come out.
Nitin Gokhale, I don't want to hold you back because you have a lot of reporting of your own to do, for joining us from Kazan. Thank you. I want to go across to Kamal Sibbal. Sir, you're a past master at the world of diplomacy. We don't know for sure, and the Chinese haven't explained why they've come in. While they've confirmed that there will be disengagement, there is no actual reasoning or rationale laid out for why they are moving back at this moment. From all the dots that you can join, what can you tell our viewers? Why are they pulling back? Is it because of economic turmoil within China? Is it because of geopolitical factors? Why do you think they're pulling back at this time?
Well, it's not as if this has happened suddenly. After all, there have been 16 rounds of talks at the diplomatic level, 21 rounds of talks at the military level. So it's been a slow, steady progress where each side has stated its case and tried to find some common ground. Now, as our foreign minister said a few days ago, that 75% of the issues had been resolved, and they remain 25%, which means that the 75% issues that got resolved was a progress that was made during the course of negotiations. Now, the last bits that remain, actually there are two issues, Depsang and Demchok. But in addition to that, the resumption of patrolling in the areas that were declared as buffer zones. Now, what has happened, obviously, is that the Chinese side and the Indian side have agreed to allow the resumption of patrolling on Demchok and Depsang. It seems that an agreement has been reached on patrolling, but whether the exact modalities have been agreed, whether the protocols have been agreed to, that remains unclear. My understanding is that after having the broad agreement, now the nitty-gritty will be decided and the new protocols would be agreed upon. One thing one needs to keep in mind, that we had the 1993, 1996, 2005, 2013 agreements on border management. Now, those haven't worked. Now, we can't go back to the same agreements in the same way and be assured that those agreements will work this time. Therefore, some new areas of understanding, some new protocols, some new steps in border management which will rebuild trust will have to be agreed. The second is that I don't think at this moment we are discussing de-escalation or moving back to the positions that two sides occupy, or de-induction. I don't think this is on the cards. And this has come out also in the remarks of the Chief of Army Staff, that first we have to build trust. And this patrolling and the fact that the two would then be able to do this patrolling without confrontation would slowly begin to build trust.
Okay.
For us, it's very difficult to de-induct, or for that matter, even to de-escalate, because we don't know what the Chinese intentions are.
Sure. So let's try and understand the Chinese intention to the extent that can be discussed in public. NR Tenjin joins us. There's a lot of talk in India about why the PLA has agreed to pull back at this time. From your understanding of the Chinese mind and what's going on inside mainland China, how can you explain this? The reasons for coming in weren't fully explained, and now how do you explain the moment when they've agreed to pull back?
Well, I see it a little differently, and I think so does Beijing. First off, during the general election, Modi, I think, believed that the U.S. was not backing him. In fact, they were criticizing him. There were a lot of allegations that were leveled against him and his government. Shortly after the election, there was an announcement that Jaishankar was going to work on the border issues. Modi went to Moscow. The optics of a Modi-Putin hug was not welcome in Washington. Shortly thereafter, Bangladesh becomes an issue. There's suspicions that the U.S. was pushing regime change there in order to punish India. Then the Five Eyes lining up behind Canada, hints not only at racial bias, but also that this is a geopolitical issue that is becoming there. Now, in the background of this, you have India has become the second largest supplier of what Washington has termed sensitive exports, including microchip circuits and machine tools, over 60 million in both April and May of this year, double what it was before, to Russia. So the Europeans are not happy. They've turned their back on India. And I think India is making very clear that India is not the Philippines and that Modi is not Bom Marcos, that India will take its own issues and its own interests first. And it's not going to regard Washington as its tutor or its teacher. So at this point, India has chosen to balance the equation and make it quite clear that they will do what is necessary to help India.
You're giving us a sense of your understanding of the Indian mind. I was asking for your sense of the understanding of the Chinese mind about why they've agreed to pull back at this time. Is it to do with internal economic turmoil, an aging population, slowing economy, the real estate bubble, lots of problems in mainland China? Is that what's forced Beijing to pull back?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, if you think about it, the amount of effort that is there in the borders is very small in terms of the Beijing's military issues. Their main issues are not on the border. They're with Taiwan, South China Seas, AUKUS, the Quad, Japan militarization. Quite frankly, from Beijing's point of view, they want to have peace with India. India and China have the largest trade relationship between these two countries. They see a bright future, and quite frankly, since 2013, Xi Jinping has been very clear that the fate of the Asian century rests with China and India. And if India does not disagrees with this idea that it'll be very hard to escape the kind of colonial, powers that have in the past tried to use Asia by separating it and conquering it.
General Sharma, do you buy that from NR Tenjin and others like him when they say that China seeks peace because if it did, it wouldn't have come in so aggressively along the line of actual control, pushing the Indian army to mobilize, build up fortifications, which we now have? Do you trust the PLA at all? Do you think this is just tactical to enable the Modi-Xi bilateral at Beijing, or does it signal a larger thaw in your view, sir?
Thank you, Rahul, for inviting me. The fact of the matter is that what the Chinese did in 2020 was coming for a long time earlier. In 10 to 15 years earlier, things had already started having a little problem. Not only in Eastern Ladakh and many other parts of the border. We know Doklam, we knew what happened in Depsang earlier, what happened in Chuma. So it was happening earlier. What happened in 2020 was a very significant departure on what has happened. And as Ambassador Kamal Sibal has said, it actually jettisoned all the treaties and all the protocols and agreements that were signed earlier in those years after 1993. And the Chinese came and sat down, the PLA came and sat down into a large area, denying us patrolling totally on the Exai-Chin Plateau. But it was not done earlier at all. This was the first time a thing like that happened in 2020. Now, if you come to today, of course, all these problems that have been stated by our esteemed representative from Hong Kong, understandably those issues are there. But I also, there's this large amount of conjecturing on what's happening in the course of since yesterday. And nobody is actually exactly clear. And reading into these 4 statements that have come out, we are making out scenarios which are based on our own mind and not actually been stated as such. So I don't think that word pullback has been stated by anybody. No pullback has been stated for the PLA at all by anybody who has spoken. All 4 gentlemen, the Foreign Secretary, the External Affairs Minister, the representative of the MOFA, which is from China, or the Chief of Army Staff. Nobody has said there's any pullback involved by the PLA or by the Indian Army. What they've said is that there will be limited disengagement, which means two areas which are not disengaged till now will be disengaged. And then there will be patrolling. Now, where would patrolling take place? And what are the modalities of that patrolling? Would it take place in the areas where buffers have been established? Or is the patrolling going to take place only, say, in the Dapsang Plateau where we'll be permitted to go there? So there is a lack of clarity, and I think I want to tamp the enthusiasm saying that ad lib, if we have gone back pre-2020 and we'll be allowed to go to Chardingla or allowed to go across to many other places, there is a positive movement, great positive movement, but I don't think that I personally read into saying that it is going back exactly pre-2020.
Sure.
And then,
so you're saying don't get carried away with these announcements, trust and verify. Raymond Vickery, how is this being looked at in Washington, D.C.? The fact is that relations between India and the United States have been a bit frosty, particularly because Washington refuses to act against terrorists believing in the Khalistani freedom movement, operating brazenly from Washington and from American soil, despite them continuing to threaten to blow up airlines and stuff, which is pretty bizarre, and that's a whole different matter. But looking at just what's happening currently between India and China and the fact these two armies have agreed at this limited disengagement, how is this being viewed in the think tank circles and government circles in DC?
Well, thanks very much for having me. I think it's always welcome when there is a move toward peace and away from violence. The whole object of international relations is peace with justice, and from the U.S. point of view, a recognition of the rule of law in international affairs. Now, that having been said, there is a long way to go, and unfortunately, a history of China not living up to its commitments. There are many questions that remain. Ladakh is a part of the picture, but really a small part of the picture. Does China still claim an entire Indian state, Arunachal Pradesh, which has been its stance, and what is its stance on other matters? I don't think there's any question that China wants to have the market of India. China's economy is not doing that well. I do think it's interesting that this comes at the time of this BRICS summit when Vladimir Putin wants to try to make it all about fighting the United States' anti-Western approach. There's no question in my mind, no question I think in the mind of policymakers here in Washington, that India and the United States have very much in common, and a lot more in common than do China and India, or even Russia and India. So I think, yes, this is an interesting development, one which is to be welcomed, but there's a long way to go, and it seems to me that it does detract from sort of the anti-Western approach that Vladimir Putin would like to have the focus on BRICS, which indicates to me that while China and Russia are joined at the hip on many matters, they're perhaps not on the same page in regard to the overall picture and the interests of their two nations.
Ambassador Kamal Sibal, how is this likely to be perceived, in your view, in the Western world? China and Russia very closely aligned on multiple hot-button geopolitical issues at this moment. India has been the balance player, largely with the United States and Western allies, but also keeping the equation warm and hot with China, with Russia before this, and now attempting a thaw with China. What's the message? The BRICS summit, outside of just the India-China bilateral, this larger BRICS summit and everything that's happening, what's the message being sent to the rest of the world?
I think the message is very clear. And the message was very clear when the Russia-India-China forum first got established, and I was still in office then. Then it got enlarged to BRIC with Brazil and then BRICS with South Africa. Initially, it was a forum to resist the phase of United States unilateralism. And then it had a much wider agenda to have much broader cooperation between the BRICS countries so that there can be an alternative view of how the globe should be governed and alternative methods of relating to each other, promoting multilateralism, reform of the international institutions, and all the agenda that is well known. And multipolarity, of course, was at the heart of it. And now that the BRICS is attracting almost 30 countries who want to become part of it in some way or the other, it is quite clear that the momentum that was started with RIC, BRIC and BRICS has now gained so much strength that now other countries also want to hedge and want to escape what they see has been decades of Western hegemony in the global system.
Raymond Vikri, let's spend a moment on the point that Ambassador Sibal makes, the fact that you've now got a powerful body which is being expanded, important players like Iran coming on board, clearly countries which are not on the same view as the Western world. It's arguably at this moment, and particularly if India and China are not in quarrel anymore and they have a reasonable working relationship, it arguably is the most significant counterweight to the Western world and Western institutions.
Well, I don't think that's the fact. There's a very vast difference among the various BRICS players in terms of what the approach should be. I think Putin and Russia would like to turn it into some sort of quasi-military alliance against the West. I don't think India subscribes to that at all. I think that it's really quite ironic that the name and the designation BRICS originated with an American investment banking firm, Goldman Sachs, and went from there. But now that it's no longer original members and it's being expanded vastly, it seems to me that the value to great democracies like India is in being able to discuss issues which affect the members of BRICS. But I don't see it as developing into much more than what it has been in the past.
Okay. I just want to tell our viewers that what you see on your screen right now are visuals, the first images that we are getting of the bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Modi and the Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian. So this important meeting taking place just a short while before now. You're seeing these images from there. I want to get a final word in from NR Tangin on the coherence of BRICS. You know, in the Western world, the Five Eyes share intelligence. They're very sharply aligned in terms of values, in terms of how they see the rest of the world, in terms of what they want from the world. The argument made by our guest in Washington is countries like India, China, Russia see things very differently, and therefore BRICS can never be as cohesive as some of these Western alliances, our Western groupings are.
Well, I would tend to disagree. I mean, if the U.S. was wishing India so well, where's the trade agreement? Why are they constantly attacking India? Remember, let us say that China was not in the mix and it was India who was rising. Do you think for 1 second that the U.S. would not attack India as it did Japan back in the late 70s and early 80s as a threat? Remember, the United States is an empire. We have been at peace for 17 years, arguably, out of 248. The way we think, if any difference in terms of race or ideology, is a challenge that has to be met with asymmetrical force. India is a civilization. It realizes that force is not the answer, that diplomacy, that recognizing differences and accepting them is the only way that you can have a win-win situation. So at this point, all this talk about alliances and etc. is nonsense. BRICS is not a military alliance. It is simply a group of countries that is expanding rapidly. It's worrying Washington because Washington has failed the world. Have looked no further than Gaza and what the Israelis are doing and the fact that the U.S. is supporting it. Understand, the U.S. does not stand for the rule of law. It does not stand for international institutions.
Okay.
It simply stands for itself.
Respond to that. That's
I'm out of time. So Raymond Vickery, very quickly, please. I realize that you could be a bit agitated with that response from our guest from Hong Kong, but very quickly, please.
That's an absolute.
I'm in Beijing.
Those are Beijing talking points. It is plain that the United States is not in any way, shape, or form attacking India. That India and the United States are the two largest and greatest democracies in the world. And so obviously China with a top-down authoritarian approach is going to be worried about what goes on in the U.S. But as far as that approach that just stated, that's just false.
Well, the interesting thing about this conversation was you heard a military and diplomatic perspective from India, you heard a perspective from Beijing, you heard from DC, and you got ground reports from Kazan. So you got a good sense of the different balls that are up in the air militarily and diplomatically. We're seeing these images of the meeting of Prime Minister Modi with the Iranian President. Let's see, because you saw that Jappi with Putin. It'll be interesting to see how Prime Minister Modi meets Xi Jinping, when that meeting does happen, if there is at all a bilateral, which is quite likely, but when it happens, how long it goes on for, and what it ultimately leads to. So we'll track all of this. Make no mistake, if India and China break the ice post-Galwan, it is the most significant story which concerns all of us and so much of the world's population. We'll track this very closely through the day tomorrow as well. Bengaluru seems to be once again crumbling under heavy rainfall and civic apathy. An under-construction building collapsed earlier this evening, killing at least 3 people. 12 more are reportedly trapped under the debris. Rescue operations are underway. A CCTV video of the incident shows the building tilting a full 90 degrees and collapsing like a pack of cards. 3 days of continuous rain have exposed civic decay in Bengaluru. Heavy downpour caused severe waterlogging in low-lying areas. Potholes also caused 2 accidents in the city.
We got the information from the city control at about 5:30. I was in the office. I rushed straight to this place. The information I came to know after coming here is that 1 person was declared dead and he's been shifted to the hospital. 5 more are trapped still inside the debris. We are trying to use fire cutters and sniffer dogs to trace the body. Bodies are dead alive. And 9 people have been rescued and sent to hospital for primary treatment.
My colleague Sagai Raj is live from the location in Bengaluru where this building collapse has taken place. What can you tell us, Sagai, about the latest rescue efforts?
The rescue operation is still underway, and you can see that the rescue personnel are using gas cutters, earth-moving equipments to cut all this steel rods which was being used while the construction was happening, and they are trying to rescue close to 4 to 5 people, the construction laborers who are trapped inside this particular debris. They are also using sniffer dogs to find out their location inside the debris to find out where exactly they are. And what we get to learn through our police sources is that they have already found out that they are stuck below this particular floor. And this is a 6th floor building where the permission was not granted by BBMP. According to the local MLA and the officials, the permission was granted only for 4 floors. But still, the contractor here constructed this particular building up to 6 floors, which is a clear violation. And they have used substandard materials to construct this building. According to the eyewitness as well as the laborer who was being rescued, he claims that the building, or the basement was not good, and they have not used good materials. They were all substandard materials which was being used during the construction of this particular building.
Okay, Sagai Raj, we'll keep coming back to you for more.